Alright, welcome ladies and gents. Let's talk Andor episode 7. So, look, the viewership for this series is well below every other Star Wars show out there. And, you know, I can't help but just be like, why? This is a beautiful show, beautifully made, detailing parts of the universe that we just never have seen. Stuff that there's just never been anything like it shown. You know, and we're following sort of pockets of stories as they sort of blend and intertwined with one another. Suffice to say, I really like this show, and it's a shame it's not getting the viewership that I personally think it deserves. I mean, it's a very... we talk about Star Wars being for kids. This is very much a more mature Star Wars. You know, this one is not really for kids. It doesn't seem to be for kids. Now, undoubtedly, kids could enjoy it, of course. But it to me, and I'll get to my review, this is part of it, it's just a shame that we have this really well put together show, people's opinion on pacing to one side, and not enough people are watching it. You know, people decry Star Wars, kiddies, blah, 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 oh no, for adults, etc. And then this comes along and doesn't get the viewership that I think it deserves. So anyway, what happens in this episode? Well, quite a lot. Obviously, this is the aftermath of the heist, which was, you know, what it was being built towards. Pretty big, epic, sort of mid-season situation. And it's the aftermath of that. So we've got quite a few things that we're picking up. Andor makes his way back to Ferrix, trying to get his mum to come away with him. And that was a really beautiful conversation, because it goes to show what people's actions can do to inspire people, even if the content, you know, the sort of intent behind their actions was selfish. So he obviously perpetrated the heist for money, a substantial amount of money, and that's what he uses to, you know, to say, hey, we can get away now. And she's like, no, I'm staying. For what? The rebellion. And you're like, So his own actions, even though his intent was selfish, have now inspired selfless acts of rebellion. Not selfless per se, but you get my point. And so there was this really interesting, beautiful conversation between the two of them. And he doesn't let on. He doesn't tell anyone. And again, it goes to show... to me, I guess that's the turning point for him. You can sort of see... yeah, maybe that's planting the seeds, you know. He's referenced as a hero, not him, but whoever perpetrated the heist, his mother references as a hero. And you're like, yeah, okay. You can start to see where this would grow and build from his want to be part of the rebellion. Inevitably, I think, obviously, she's going to die. And we did some flashbacks, well done flashbacks, of his adopted father being killed. You know, the one actually called Clem. And that was quite tragic, like how he was hung up. And it's brutal. Again, this is definitely for adults. You know, he was hung in a street by the Empire. Really brutal stuff. But then he just flaunts off to a gaming pleasure planet. And by the end of the episode, he's just making his way to a shop. And he's caught up in something else. And he's misaccused. And we see the K2SO robots, the big security droids. And he's now put in prison for 6 years. And you're like, there you go. That plus that equals wanting to join the rebellion, I would imagine. Not only that, also the fact that now we know that Luthen is going to try and take him out, which we see earlier in the episode, because him being imprisoned is basically the end of the episode. Interesting points to note. He's called Keith. You know, it's a very sort of British person's name. It's like, all right, Keith. Most normal sounding name I've heard in Star Wars thus far. Keith. All right then. Bit of an odd one. Clem is as well, actually. That's a name I've heard before. But I don't know, I thought that was interesting. Now, Mon Mothma, interesting character. I really wish the actors would just shut up though, because I don't want to hear how she's apparently Nancy Pelosi, Skeletor running around, because she doesn't seem to be anything like Nancy Pelosi. And so, when I'm watching this and I hear these actors' words, and I'm like, shut the fuck up, I'm not interested in this crap. But Mon Mothma is a really interesting character. How she confronts Luthen, and Luthen's like, yeah, that was the price to pay. And she's like, don't tell me you did it, don't tell me you did it. He's like, yeah, of course I did. Of course I did, yeah. This is what you wanted. There's no turning back now. This is it. Which is interesting how they're sort of at odds with one another. And he's essentially the driving force behind it. Without Luthen, there would be no rebellion. Regardless of what Mon Mothma does. She's a pointless cog in this machine at this point in time. She may become something important, but at this time she's just trying to accrue funds, which Luthen went and did by himself anyway, and perpetrated acts of terrorism to further the rebellion, or at least launch its inception. And that's really, really telling. It just all came from this one dude. Beautiful stuff, like really, really good. And this is what I like. I like that's the stuff that we just don't get to see that much of. And then obviously Mon Mothma, goes to these parties and is trying to be cordial to other people and sort of get them involved, but in, sort of sneaky fashions. And it's interesting how she's even like, suspects her husband of spying on her now. So it goes to show how this, this sort of paranoia runs so deep. And then last but not least, what I wanted to discuss were two things actually. The ISB from Dedra, but then also I want to discuss the disgraced security officer. Because those scenes with his mother and how he's just looking out over the mid-levels of Coruscant were just beautifully done. Sat there at the dining table having breakfast, and she starts picking him apart on what he's wearing, and he's like, I had it tailored. She's like, oh, well, your clothes say a lot about you. And then he's like, well, what does my collar say to you then, mother? And his name's Syril. So she's like, well, Syril, it says, I'm asking for, I don't think much of myself. I'm trying to prove myself. And all this kind of stuff is just like, wow. Like, you can see how that harboured resentment grew for him to become what he was. But here's an interesting story, and I'm really quite curious to see where it goes. Because he's teetering on the edge. Each time we see him, another failure, another stabbing from, emotion from his mother, and all these kind of things. And they could lead ultimately to something really compelling, right? That he changes sides, or doubles down and goes full-blown Imperial sort of officer, right? Like there's multiple ways they could take it. So I'm really intrigued with that. And then obviously by the close of the episode, he's literally just a worker ant in the hive, a little bean counter as it were. So that's interesting. And then the ISB Dedra, that was great. That massive meeting where they're like, yeah, you do whatever you like now, we're expanding our reach, etc. She's like, no, that's wrong. Speaks to her lackey like, that's wrong, he's treating it like a robbery, that's what the rebellion wants us to do. It's not. And then obviously being confronted by everyone, and then the leader of the ISB basically saying, no, you should be more like her to everyone. Walk with me. And they walk out, and just those few words, well played, watch your back. 5 words said, and it speaks so much volumes about the interpersonal, employment politics working within the Empire. Beautiful show, beautifully made. Strong recommendation.